The other day, I wanted to take my granddaughter to a special dollhouse and miniature store that was a little bit over an hour away. So I plugged my phone into the navigation system in my car and off we went. Well, about halfway there, the sound stopped working and I couldn't hear my little buddy with the Australian accent who tells me how to get places. The screen was still working, but there wasn't any sound. And I was in a little bit of a panic because I kept having to glance down to make sure that we were going in the right direction. And it got me to thinking, what would we do without GPS? Do people even know how to read a map anymore? So, in today's episode, we're going to dive into the first grade social studies standard that maps can be used to locate and identify places. And we're going to talk about how we can teach map skills to kids. So, let's get started. When I was a kid, we used to go on a vacation to Nags Head, North Carolina every single year. It was about a 12-hour drive from where we lived, and it was long before cell phones or navigation systems. So my mom and dad and I would pile into the car, and my dad would hand me the map. And the reason was because my mom could never understand how to read a map, and she just never understood that you had to turn the map in the direction that you were driving in order to read it. But for some reason, even as a kid, I just got it. So there I was, my little 10-year-old self, navigating the trip for my dad. I'd tell him how far we had to go to get to the next exit by using the map key and which exit we had to get off. I mean, I'm kind of honestly amazed when I think about it now. But the question is, does anybody even know how to read a map anymore? We're all so used to electronic navigation on our phones and in our cars, but what if it wasn't available? How would we get from point A to point B? So today we're talking about teaching map skills to kids. It's actually a first grade standard. In our Ohio learning standards, it says that kids should understand that maps can be used to locate and identify places. So I think the first thing that you want to do before you begin teaching anything is to build a little background so that the kids understand where you're going with this lesson. So in my classroom, I'd read the book Me on the Map by Joan Sweeney. It's a good book because it kind of shows kids their place in the world. It starts off by showing a little girl in her bedroom, and it has a side-by-side comparison of what a bedroom looks like for real and then a map of the bedroom. So it's sort of a realistic picture and then a top-down view for the map. And then next it moves a little further out by showing a realistic picture of her house and then a map of her house. And then it goes even further out by showing a realistic picture of her street and a map of her street. So it keeps going further and further out, and it breaks it down from very basic places like her town and her city, and then to the entire world. So it's really a cool book to use when you're teaching kids about maps because it really shows kids exactly what a map looks like and how maps show you where different places are. It really helps students with their spatial thinking and understanding just the basic concept of a map. So even though this book shows maps all the way to the map of our world, for our lesson purposes, we basically stuck to making maps of our rooms and our town because that's really what the kids could understand. So after we read the book, we'd make a list of different places that we might find in our town. And of course, it's going to be different depending on where you live in the country. For us, we listed stuff like the fire station, the hospital, Walgreens, the school, churches. We have a lake near us, so we put that on our list. We just listed all the different places that we might find in our town. And so then I had the kids work in small groups to make a map of our town. I actually helped them get started by making the base of the map for them. I had these giant white sheets of construction paper. So if you can picture this in your mind, I think they were about 18 by 24 inches. And then I drew some simple roadways on the paper ahead of time, basically to save time and also to give them a foundation to start with. So when I gave the maps to the different groups of kids, their job was simply to create the buildings and the map key. I put lots of colors of construction paper on my guided reading table, and I had a scrap box full of all kinds of scrap paper. And then I let the kids come up and get whatever they needed to make their buildings. Their job was to create a map of our town. There weren't any patterns or anything. They just used the construction paper to make different buildings like the school, the hospital, grocery store, the fire station, their houses, all those sorts of places. And then when they were done, they made a little map key that they put in the corner of each map and wrote what each building represented. So then we could talk about how map keys work and how they help you find places on the map. The kids really loved this project. It was a little bit messy, but all good projects always are, right? And when they finished, they really started to understand how maps work. So then we also talked about how maps don't show real pictures of things, but they use symbols instead. For instance, if you're looking for an airport on a map, you're not going to see the actual airport, but you might see a tiny little airplane that symbolized the airport. So I had some anchor charts that showed pictures of different places on the map and then the symbols that went with them on the map key. So we kind of learned how that works. And then I had them do a pocket chart activity where they had to match a picture of a real place to the image that showed the symbol for that place. So that really helped them understand map keys. And then another thing we did was we learned how a compass rose works. I showed them how there are symbols for north, south, east, and west. And then I had some worksheets where they had to follow the directions to place things on the map by following the compass rose. For instance, there was one worksheet that looked like a farm, and the kids had little pictures of farm animals. And then there was a compass rose on the top of the worksheet, and so I'd give them directions like glue the pig north of the barn, or glue the cow south of the fence. So they had to look at the compass rose to figure out where north, south, east, and west were, and they had to follow that to put the pictures in the right place. They actually thought that was really fun, and it really made them think, and they started to learn cardinal directions. I mean, it's first grade, so it was really very simple, but it was basically just giving them the foundation of the kinds of things we see on a map and how to use them. All of these activities that I'm talking about today are part of my map unit on TPT. And you can take a closer look at that at 𝘧𝗲_land.com/map, or I'll put the link in the show notes. All right, we also learned how to follow directions on a map too. I had some different worksheets that had different maps with a map key, and then the kids had to follow the directions to get from point A to point B. So for instance, one page was called Nina's Neighborhood, and they had to get Nina from school to home, but along the way she made some stops. And so the directions said stuff like, Nina started her day at school. After school, she mailed a letter at the post office. Next, she said hello to the fireman at the fire station. Then she stopped at the bakery for a cookie, and finally she went home. So the kids had to find those places on the map and draw a line along the roadway to show Nina's path from school to home. It was just another good way for kids to understand how maps work and how you can use them to find different places. Another way you can help kids understand maps is to have them draw maps of different places that they might be familiar with. They can make a map of their bedroom, a map of the zoo, the park, all sorts of places like that. So teaching kids about map skills doesn't have to be boring. It can be very hands-on, and I honestly think that's important because when kids get in there and really make the maps, that's what's going to get them really understanding how maps work, and that's what helps them to remember the skill. It's an important first grade social studies skill and also just a good life skill to have because you never know when Google Maps is going to go down and you might need to read a paper map, right? So if you want to try teaching map skills to your kids, you can grab everything you need in my map unit on TPT at 𝘧𝗲land.com/map. And if you do decide to make maps with your kids, post some pictures and tag me on Instagram. I'd love to see what you're doing in your classrooms. All right, friends, that's it for today. Until next time, remember to make learning feel like play, and I'll see you next week. Thanks so much for tuning in. I hope you're walking away with some great tips that you can use right away. Be sure to hit the follow or subscribe button so you never miss an episode. And if you're enjoying the podcast, I'd love it if you'd leave a review. You can find the show notes and links for everything mentioned in this episode at 𝘧𝗲land.com. I'll see you next week in 𝘧𝗲land.